Syrian activists claimed Wednesday that army defectors belonging to the Free Syrian Army fired machine guns and RPGs at an Air Force intelligence base in Hastara, just north of Damascus, around 2:30 a.m. local time. They also claimed to have targeted military checkpoints in the suburbs of Douma, Kabun, Arabin, and Sakba. There has been no independent confirmation of these claims, but the reports are directing attention toward the capabilities of the Free Syrian Army, and just how far the Turkish government is willing to go in supporting this group of army defectors. The Free Syrian Army is a group of mostly Sunni conscripts and mid to low-rank officers who fled to Turkey. This group, led by Colonel Riyad al-Assad, has, with the permission of the Turkish government, set up a base of operations in southern Turkey, and has announced the creation of what it calls a temporary military council to oust the regime of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. This group of army defectors is operating under extremely heavy constraints, considering that the Syrian security apparatus is dominated by the country's Alawite minority, the vast majority of whom view the current struggle as an existential crisis against the Sunni majority. Unless serious cracks in the army occur among this Alawite command, it will be very difficult for lower-ranking Sunni members to find the opening they need to wage a successful coup. Another factor greatly hampering this group is that they need a sanctuary to organize and sustain an armed resistance within effective operating range of the main areas of resistance. Turkey's willingness to host the Free Syrian Army raises the question of whether Turkey would be willing to go further in supporting an armed opposition in Syria. Speculation has been raised over whether the refugee camps in southwestern Turkey, where the Free Syrian Army leadership is located, could be extended into a staging ground for Syria's fledgling armed opposition. Turkey has many options in terms of arming, advising, and training these forces, and an idea that has also been raised prominently in the Turkish press and in private talks amongst Turkish officials is that of Turkey establishing a military buffer zone along the Syria-Turkish border with Arab League and possibly UN backing. Speculation over how far such a buffer zone would actually extend into Syrian territory varies greatly, and there is no clear indication that Turkey is close to a decision on this matter. Though Turkey has been trying to demonstrate that it has real clout beyond rhetoric in pressuring Syria, there are also risks in escalating matters and going so far as to commit forces to the problem. First, it's important to keep in mind that the areas where the opposition is concentrated, in Homs and Hama, as well as the Damascus suburbs and Daraa in the southwest, are a fair distance from the northern border with Turkey. Second, Turkey's primary security imperative in dealing with Syria is to ensure the instability in Syria does not reach a level that would encourage Kurdish separatist activity from spilling across the border. So far, Kurdish protesters in Syria have been relatively contained, and while there are several thousands of Syrian refugees living in Turkish refugee camps, Turkey is no longer facing an imminent crisis of refugees flooding across the border, since most of the Syrian military's crackdowns have been focused much further south. Further Turkish escalation would make Turkey vulnerable to Syrian and Iranian militant proxy attacks, a factor that's likely weighing heavily on the minds of the Turkish leadership, as they're already dealing with a significant rise in PKK activity and are more interested in focusing their military assets on uprooting PKK cells in southeastern Turkey and northern Iraq. Syria and Iran may not have a great deal of influence on the PKK's command structure based out of Kandil Mountain, but there are a number of splinter factions that could be exploited to demonstrate to the Turks the repercussions of pushing the al-Assad regime over the edge. If Turkey were to seriously contemplate further escalation in Syria and absorb the risks associated with such action, it would be more likely in response to their concerns over the Kurdish threat than their concerns for Syrian citizens. This is why it's going to be extremely important to watch for signs of unusual Kurdish militant activity in Turkey that the Turkish leadership could trace back to Syria. That would be the game changer that could lead to more serious action from the Turks.